Margaret. It's so good to see you again. As we were kind of talking about before we jumped on the interview, I had the pleasure of meeting you when you were an exhibiting artist at Chautauqua this summer. So again, just thanks for being on the show and making time for it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, as I mentioned, I had the privilege of meeting Margaret this past summer to see her fantastic sculpture. And she was also on a panel discussion where she dove into the metal sculptures she's making and then also the jewelry pieces that she creates. And I just found it fascinating hearing about this entire dialogue between sculpture, jewelry, similarities, differences. So, again, excited to have you on here. And I would love to start at the beginning as to when you started to really get into the arts or felt like you were really kind of finding your footing.
Yeah, so I went to Dartmouth College, and I went there knowing that I would do art in some capacity. I didn't really know what that would look like or how that could happen. Just, there wasn't. I have an uncle who's an artist, and like we had a family friend who was an artist, but I never really like I guess understood how you could be a full-time artist. So I think for me, like a really big change was I had a high school art teacher and she, she was doing full-time work in New York City and then she came back and kind of gave me an insight to her path. So then going into Dartmouth, like I knew I wanted to do art in some capacity and just didn't quite realize like how to get there. So I did a lot of theater design. I took studio art classes, and just kind of learned what the possibilities of that could be and what that could look like. Did my first artist residency at Chautauqua when I think I was a sophomore. Or maybe I'm not sure. It was, but I did my first artist residency in college, at Chautauqua. And then I think just it really enabled me to see artists and how they could um how they're making work, how they're living, how they're surviving, how I guess it's a variety of ways that you can kind of go about that.
Hmm. I love that there's this thread in terms of like having this high school teacher who had, been on that path and then shared their experience with you. And then, you're in college, you're at Dartmouth, and you go to Chautauqua where you see working artists who are teaching. So it sounds like, you always were looking at these people who were putting it together. And I think that is something I hadn't completely thought about with Chautauqua. Like the beauty of having younger artists in there is that they can see, like, experience, see the artist doing the thing. So I appreciate you sharing that. So after Dartmouth, can you tell us a little bit about your journey, like coming out of undergrad and kind of where you went and what your work was doing at the time?
Yeah, so I graduated, and then they had an internship program. So I stayed on as an intern for it was supposed to be for one summer and then the school year, and it turned into the summer and the school year and another summer, and then I was interim director of painting and drawing. Um, and I think it just gave me kind of like more insight to things, and what I could do. I did a lot in the sculpture department. I think it was just natural that they stuck me in there. I was familiar with the tools. I grew up in a creative family. Like we always used tools. We were making stuff. We were repairing stuff. So I was comfortable with using tools and doing like maintenance and technical things like that. But I also spent a lot of time in the exhibitions department and worked with Jerry Otten, who was the exhibitions director for the galleries at that time, and just learned how to curate shows, how to hang artwork, how to install, how to like pack things, how to ship stuff. Um, and then after my stint at Dartmouth was over, ended up working at a local nonprofit education and exhibition space for I think it was about 7 years. And I ran the exhibition department there and just really learned how to do things kind of from like behind the scenes. And then it was also, I think it was also, it was a really great space to be in because I learned how to install work. I learned how to, how to curate work. I learned how to work with artists. And because I was doing things like reviewing grant proposals and reviewing like artist proposals, I knew it would make a good artist proposal when I left finally. Learned how to do press releases and just kind of like all that businessy stuff that nobody ever really talks about in the field.
Mhm.
Yeah. So when I left in 2017 and it was like it was one of those like, well, it's gonna be like now or never things. So I left and kind of jumped in and started running and just have been doing this full time since then. But I feel like that it really gave that exhibition job really gave me a good kind of foundation on the things that aren't really taught about um in school like in school.
Hmm. So I really want to dive into that more and kind of get your perspective on that. But first I'm going to talk more about your work. So I'm going to like pin that here. Um, but I love that you're bringing up that you got like this on the job experience that most artists we just don't get it in school. And
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate of also getting paid to learn when you can.
Yeah.
So like learning on the job, that was me in my first job. And I still use those skills that I got in a full-time job because so many artists are told, if you don't do the full-time job, don't do this. But in a lot of ways, it can really serve us to teach us the skills while getting paid to then go out on your own like you've done. Um, so first, I want to hear a little bit more about, you said you were really comfortable with tools, your family used them a lot, you repaired things. Can you tell us how you started working with steel, which is your primary medium right now, right?
So steel and then in the jewelry I'm using brass. So kind of like I would say like all metal. Um yeah, so I actually studied painting in school. I was did painting and photography. And then when I was in the theater department, I did a lot of like scenic painting. So I was kind of leaning towards that for a while. And then started kind of tiptoeing around mixed media sculpture. And just really felt like I feel like object making was really the way that I wanted to create, and that like painting was okay, but it was more I was kind of more trying to like make the object with my paintings. So when I was an intern, I had a professor give me like a really like brief intro to steel, but started using it and was just like this is just it just clicked. It was like this is the material, this is what I should be using. This feels right. And then with I think with that like natural affinity for the material, there's also this history of Mohawk ironworkers working with steel, so I just really like that kind of like historical connection and narrative that's within the work as well. um so yeah, so I spent a lot of time, I like to call it like independent education, so like mentorships, taking classes at the local like Votech school, trying to like just learn by doing, asking friends, did a couple like residencies. Um I did a 1 week class at Anderson Ranch that I think really just I came away from that and I was like, I understand metal now. So that was really fantastic. And yeah, so just, kind of was doing that at the same time that I was doing my full-time job. And then like showing when I could, and just I think learning as much as I could about the material because it felt right. And it was even like as I was learning and learning how to work with it, I was like, I know this is gonna be it when I get to the point that I understand the material.
I love it. I love it. Your sculptures are beautiful. And one of the things I really love, because I can only imagine manipulating steel, I've never done it, extensively. And you just have such a touch with it where you're able to balance, like you were saying earlier, like the natural and the man-made. So like there's these hard edges and then these soft edges. And as I was looking at it, I thought it was interesting that many times the man-made object is, like a tool, or like I wasn't sure if that was like a tractor seat or something like that in one of them. So it's almost like these objects that we use to maintain or work with the natural landscape. And so I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about the work and the content in it.
Yeah, so I think at the beginning I was doing a combination of like found object and integrating that with with fabricated and what I'm making. I'm kind of stepping away from that a little bit. But if I do find objects that I'm really I think like pulled towards, then I definitely like save them to use them. Yeah, I grew up in a geographically rural area, so I think these are things that I'm kind of used to seeing, so I already have a natural affinity for that. But also just really, I really like the associated narratives that these objects have with them already. So like you're
Mhm.
taking this thing that has a history, it has a story, it has a narrative, and you're kind of either adapting it, you're integrating it, you're changing that narrative a little bit. And I think it really gives people multiple layers to kind of like dig into the work.
Mhm.
So like with the wrenches, they're Mohawk ironworker spud wrenches.
Mhm.
So, if you work in the field, you're going to see them and know exactly what they are. If you don't, you might kind of know, but or might kind of have like an inkling of idea or have no idea at all. But I do like that it kind of gives people kind of, I guess, an affinity for an object that they have a relationship with. So I think it makes an easier entry point sometimes into the work.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think I'm definitely in this area where it's like fine craft, fine art. I don't really like to see that. I don't really think of them as separate. I'm using a lot of blacksmithing tools and techniques, even though I'm not making blacksmithing work, but then adding in all of these like fabrication elements of like welding, grinding, and using everything all at once. And I think, there's this huge history and tradition of craft, which I also really enjoy. There's this really long narrative. There's these relationships. So you have relationship with object and what that object meaning has. Then you also have like relationship with the process, whether it's a craft process or sculptural process. But then you also have the concepts and narratives that I think I'm just trying to create like within the work.
Beautiful. I would love to hear a little bit too. Well, you said you're kind of stepping away. If you want to share what you're working on now, and then also I'd love to hear about the jewelry and when you started kind of working with that.
Yeah, so what I'm working on now, so I recently received a Native Artist Fellowship to through the NMAI Smithsonian. So
Congratulations.
I get, thank you. So I will be going to DC for 3 to 4 weeks next year, and I get to look at their collection. I get to look at their like objects.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's going to be a lot of fun. And so what I've kind of been working on and then leading up to it is looking at like historically made objects that still have like relevance today in rural living. So snowshoes, baskets, utility baskets, fancy baskets. I'm thinking about the emerald ash borer. My Akwesasne is a basket weaving community, so having the emerald ash borer doesn't just take away the tree, it takes away this like cultural lifestyle and narrative. So I'm thinking about that a lot. So the work that I've been making has been more creating all of the object versus like having a found object that I'm kind of integrating botanical and plant into. So recently I've been doing a couple of different basket versions. I've been creating like the cardboard berry baskets that you see like at road stands. So I've started with that. I'm like making baby steps towards like a more complex object. Because the thing that I love about metal too is like you have to figure out how you can actually make this thing. And sometimes it's just like it just doesn't work. So I've been starting with like simpler basket forms, and then I did like a large berry basket weave for an exhibition in Binghamton. And I would like to lead up to something that's a little bit more complex that you would see like in a Haudenosaunee fancy basket. But I'm also working on a pair of like steel snowshoes and lacrosse stick, and just trying to take like cultural object and kind of not necessarily like just remake it out of metal. I want to really transform it and create a different narrative with the work.
Well, that sounds incredibly exciting, and I can't wait to see all the work that comes out of it, and also this wonderful experience you're going to be having next year. Again, congratulations on that.
Thank
That's
you.
incredible.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to share more at that time over on I Like Your Work, maybe like an update and show what you're making. But one of the things I found interesting as well, we were talking about the relationship between art and craft overlap, all these different conversations that surround that. And I love that you are involved in jewelry making too. And I really loved seeing the jewelry that you created, how you were exhibiting it. So can you talk a little bit about the jewelry that you make and how you kind of got started in that area?
Yeah, so it was I started purely from like a very practical standpoint. I started doing like these shows and markets and just needed something that was saleable and could potentially like make me a little bit back of like the booth fee and the travel expenses. So I have a friend who's a jeweler, and she had taken a powder coating class, and she was like, "I really think that you like this." So introduced me to powder coating, and it kind of gave me like a basics like basics into jewelry. And so I kind of just like built that up over time, and I'd get to a certain point and I'd be like, okay, I don't know like what to do next, and then I'd go and ask her, and she'd help me figure it out or show me how you're supposed to do it. So yeah, so just at the very beginning, it was, making pieces that could really help support my travel. I traveled really heavily in the very beginning, just to get my name out there, just to get like my name, my face, my work out there. And then I think as I've gained like more experience in the field and really understand the material better, I'm trying to really concentrate on more like one of a kind objects. One of a kind objects, more like sculptural, more drawing based pieces versus more, I don't know, say like inventory or saleable things. So that's kind of the direction that I'm headed in. But it's really nice because it really provides me an opportunity to explore, but like similar idea, like or similar concepts, but in a really different way of making. And then like with the sculpture, I generally just like I blacken and wax, so you kind of have this really like heavy graphic that you can play with shadows. It's like really the stark contrast with the jewelry. I get to play with color, I get to play with texture, and then I can like integrate other materials into it. So I feel like if I'm getting stuck on one thing, then I can kind of jump over to the other thing. Or if like one feels like work, I can go into the other one because it'll feel like play. So it really allows me to, I think, just keep going in my practice and really like explore things in I would say like in a different way.
Mm, I love that conversation happening between the sculptures and like you said, moving ahead with something and you're like, okay, I need a break. I need to do something over here. And then they feed one another, which is really beautiful. And I think you also see that, of course, when I saw your work, I could see this beautiful conversation happening there. So I'd love to hear a little bit about since I'm not a sculptor and I always love hearing about different practices, like how you kind of start a piece. Like it sounds like you kind of in this other work that you had previously, there would be objects that you'd kind of be responding to. But are there like preliminary sketches that you're doing, or how do you really start to dive into a piece?
Yeah, so I think and it's a little different like sculpture versus jewelry, but primarily I start with research. So I'm looking at different things, trying to looking at different like plants, natural materials, reading a lot, trying to get, I guess, a story and alongside the visual that I want to create. And it's really interesting because there's certain things that I'm like, I really want to make this out of metal and it just hasn't worked. I just like can't figure out how to do it yet. But usually it's like it's a plant or a plant form that I'm interested in exploring that has like a strong narrative within it. And that's either like I mean, and I'm usually looking for different layers. So it has like cultural presence, it has like family presence. It has like a couple different stories to that. Yeah, so that's generally how I'm kind of like starting with sculpture, and I'll start with like rough sketches and but I feel like I don't say it's like it's a little bit looser, it's a little bit more I think I as I work more on it, I kind of see the finished project or finished product. I don't really have an idea of what it's specifically going to be when I'm going into it. Like with the old growth series, which has the spud wrenches on the top and the plants on the bottom. Like I had the series of wrenches, and I know I want to pair these with natural materials and botanicals. I just wasn't quite sure. Like I didn't have like a specific thing in mind. It was more like, okay, make the one. And I think, you know, as an artist, like we make one thing and then we have like 10 other ideas. So when you're working like with like 20, when you're I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make it like a 20-piece series, like it's helpful to do that. Um, and then with the jewelry, I have much more specific drawings. So I have drawings that I use as patterns for when I'm cutting. So I'm very specific with those. They're patterns that I like make copies of, I keep, I'll reuse. I'll kind of like move them around a little bit. And so with those, I'll have the form. I'll have like a really specific form. And I think of it more as I think like as a drawing, I'm just drawing with object. And then I get to kind of like play with the color, with the finish and the texture. And that's kind of like the play and the creative part of that for me. Whereas with the sculpture, it's more like once I get to the part where I'm like putting these components together and using like the torch to move, that's kind of where that like where the play happens, the play within the object happens versus like the cutting out of all the pieces and the grinding and the work part of it.
I love hearing that, like this idea of it being like this response, like it happens within the making of the actual piece, you know, like we do the planning, we do the prep, and then you're in there really responding to the material itself, it sounds like. Um,
Yeah.
so now I would love to return to something that you had talked about previously, which is, I love this idea of independent learning that you said. So, like independent learning by taking classes or researching and doing it. And then we were talking about like getting paid to learn, like
Yeah.
on the job. Um, and I would love for you to share a little bit more about that experience with artists that are listening, in terms of like if there's thoughts or what you learned about being an artist writing proposals for these spaces. So little things that you kind of picked up along your way.
Yeah, and so I don't like to use the term self-taught because it's like no one's ever really self-taught, right? Like if you're reading a book, someone gave you like wrote that book. There's that information. It's like, and I've also heard like community taught. So that's why I like the term independent education because it's like, well, I'm like kind of creating my own education path, but I'm definitely like learning from other people. I'm learning within community, I'm learning with with mentors, I'm learning with different instructors, but it just might not be a traditional it's not like a traditional like academic, I
Mm.
guess, education. Um so yeah, so that's kind of why that's why I like that term. Um and uh
Yeah, if there's like anything that, yeah, kind of popped out to you working in the exhibition space is like, oh, this would be really helpful for artists to know when they're writing a proposal or their statement or anything like that, like things that maybe common mistakes that, or I'll put that in
yeah.
mistakes that artists made that you're like, oh, if you just would have done this differently, it would have presented better when it comes to the exhibition side of things?
Yeah, so I think overall having like a clear idea,
Mhm.
you know, you want to be clear, you want to be concise, and you want to convey, you want to be very, you want to communicate clearly. And that's kind of what it comes down to. You want to communicate your idea, you want to communicate your work very clearly. So once you kind of get, if you like, if you have an artist statement that's like 4 pages of art speak, like nobody's gonna read that. um so for me it was something that even if it's, you don't want it too short, but I would prefer shorter, but really like clear and concise versus something that like, you know, reads like a thesis. Um, and it's kind of the same, you know, with the images, like you want a really good, you want the person to get a really good idea of your work. So you want high resolution images, you want nice images, you want singles of your work, maybe some installation shots too, so you can see it as a whole. I think one of the hard things for my work is it's really hard to kind of like gain scale, or it's hard to kind of get a sense of them as one. So I always try to do like, you know, if I'm doing singles, then I also have like an installation shot, so people can get a sense of that. I think sculpture is a little tricky because sometimes you need like different angles. So I I think composites are okay. Like if you have a front shot and then a left and the right, some places that you're applying to are specifically like we do not want composite shots. I was cool with them. So I think it just depends on like, you know, reading through the application and seeing, you know, and seeing what they want. Um, I had a friend who said she, you know, she writes an artist statement for every piece that she makes. And so when I was starting out, I was like, that's crazy. And now I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, yeah. So I try and like update regularly. I like to like read a lot of other people's artist statements as well. And like sometimes there's like phrasing or terminology in there. And I'm like, oh, that's what I've been trying to say. But I couldn't quite get there. For me, the like writing is really hard. So I spend a lot of time on it and I spend a lot of time like crafting it and crafting exactly how I want to say. So I like to go in and like to read other people's information, especially those artists whose work I really enjoy and I think are doing like similar things or exploring similar things that I am. So just seeing like what the phrasing that they're using, the terminology that they're using. And then I like so I think one thing for me is getting somebody to proof stuff for you. And it can be anybody, it can be a partner, it can be a friend, it could be a family member. But you know, just having somebody to kind of like read through whatever and be like, this doesn't make sense, or like you have like a weird typo here. I think that's like hugely beneficial. Just to get another set of eyes on things. And you know, having somebody that you can kind of, you know, you can trust to do that with is super helpful. I think overall having like a clean and organized proposal is great. So, you know, you have your naming conventions are consistent, your you know, you have everything in there. It's not like you know, if you have like, you know, if you have like a bio statement and then your images, it's not like so everything's like kind of like organized well. For me, whenever I saw something like that come in, I was like, okay, it looks more professional. So it comes off as more professional, looks more professional. um yeah, and then I think I'm not afraid to ask the question or reach out. Like sometimes you'll look at things and you're like, this doesn't quite make sense. So like reaching out to somebody just for like a clarification is always, I think is always kind of okay to do. And then also, you know, if they're reviewing like 200 applications, then they see your name and you're like, oh, this person like is interested. But they've engaged with me already. They've reached out to ask, you know, to ask about this part or something. And I think you don't want to be like aggressive with it. But I think just like sometimes like just making like basic human contact puts you a little bit ahead because you're not just this like another anonymous person in this like, yeah, in this batch of like 300 applications.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, that human touch can be really important. Not to the point where you're like emailing them every other day, but
Yeah.
you know, um, showing like this is who I am. I care enough to reach out, and just being professional. And I also really liked how you brought up just having somebody else read what you're writing, because it's so easy for us to be in our, we make the work, we understand the
Hmm.
work, and are we communicating that clearly? And having someone else who isn't in our minds read it, I think sometimes I can say, I don't really know what you're trying to say here, or I kind of get it. So I think that's a really great piece to that. And not doing all the art jargon, like he
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
People can understand. Oh man. Well, Margaret, this has been so wonderful to chat with you about your beautiful work that you've been making, learn more about the process, and really exciting stuff that's on the horizon this next year. Um, can you give us where we can find you online, your website or Instagram, so we can all find you after this?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, margaretjacobs.com, and then my Instagram is at Margaret of Steel. I try to keep I think I think my Instagram is a little bit more updated than with my website, but like I try and keep stuff updated, but it's also just me, so sometimes it's hard to do that.
Doing all the things, right? Like all the
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the other thing, like about being an artist. It's like, oh, you are all of the things.
Yes, all the hats are right here.
Yeah, I have a friend, and we joke sometimes. I was like, yes, Margaret Jacobs Studios is just me. And sometimes like family members who I can convince to like drop off artwork to different locations for me.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Oh, well, Margaret, thank you so much. And everybody, you'll be able to find Margaret's work through the spaces she just shared, but also over on our website at ilikeyourworkpodcast.com and on our Instagram. So thanks, Margaret, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.